everybody. Welcome to our third workshop of the spring semester 2020. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to get started on this workshop. I think you all are going to enjoy our guest speaker this evening. I think gonna learn a lot. Our topic of our workshop this evening is on the topic of how do I prepare for a professional interview? So you're going into the interview, maybe you've gone to career fairs, maybe your mentors hooked you up and connected you with someone at their company. Maybe you've gotten some referrals somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. You are about to step into the interview. Maybe you've already had interviews before. This workshop is about how to think about interviews differently. We are bringing in guest speakers who are experts on this topic from around the world to give you insight and wisdom on how to make the most out of the professional interview. So this workshop is going to be about 45 minutes long with, and I encourage you to ask questions throughout the workshop. I'm going to ask you 3 questions during the workshop, which I'll have you answer. That's how you get credit for being here. You're now midway through the program so far. You should have already had your first conversation with your mentor. Hopefully you've already started setting up your second conversation with your mentor. If you have not, or you're struggling to get in touch with your mentor, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We need to take care of you so then you can get connected and make the most out of this program. So really, this program is all about how can you prepare for the first professional interview. Really, what you're selling your interviewer on is your ability, essentially your future potential opportunity. Essentially, you are selling them on your potential, because at the end of the day, people are not expecting you to come in and be the expert on XYZ topic. They are expecting you to be a willing learner and someone that's eager to gain knowledge and to be a better professional. If you can convey that, you will get the opportunity. But it will be competitive, especially in highly competitive industries. And I know that anybody that's in this program is more likely than not going into a career that's competitive. I mean, you would not have gotten a mentor had you not wanted to take your level, take your career, take your life to the next level. So with that said, I want to encourage you to keep your head up, keep applying, put yourself out there for more opportunities, and leverage the insight and knowledge that you're getting in these workshops to make yourself and to help you better prepare yourself for the interview. Now, before we get started into our main program, I want to ask you a quick question, and that question is, when it comes to the interview, how do you want people to feel about you? In other words, what feeling are you trying to convey about yourself when you are in an interview? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that, because I think if we are more intentional about how we want other people to feel about us in the interview, our likelihood of actually having that happen increases substantially. I mean, I've talked about in past workshops, strategy, story, state, which I will talk about in a moment, but this is a really big part of the story part. Like, what is the story that you're telling yourself? Now, I think sometimes we can interpret that as psyching ourselves up, getting ourselves confident, getting ourselves pumped for why we're going to be successful. And I think that's great. But I think if we could take it to another level, that being intentional about how we want other people to perceive us. So if we want them to perceive us as confident, or if we want them to perceive us as knowledgeable, or if we want them to perceive us as eager to learn and having potential, it could be a variety of things. But what I really want you to do is I really want you to identify feelings that you want other people to feel about you when you enter their world. Because you can be intentional about that. Your likelihood of having them actually feel that is much greater. But if you don't set the intention, you have no idea how they're going to feel about you. You've got really no control over it. But if you intentionally think to yourself, I want people to think of me as confident. Okay, what am I going to do that's going to convey and convey confidence? Really, it's all about whatever that feeling you want to convey. Make sure that you are taking actions and being intentional about ensuring that other people view you that way, and that you come in trying to actively think about actions that you can take that will help other people perceive you in that light. So let's start under the next part of our workshop. Now, I've talked about this in the past before, and I've talked about this in previous workshops, but one of the big things that I always love to stress is the 3 keys to success in the program. There are 3 of them. That is your strategy, that is your story, that is your state. I bring it up every single time because it is that important. And the reason why it's important is because if we are not honing our strategy, honing our story, honing our state, we are not setting ourselves up for successful. If we let someone else drive our roadmap for us, we could end up in a location that we do not want to be. But if we are intentional about our story, if we're intentional about our strategy, if we are intentional about our state, we are much more likely to get to where we would like to go. It's kind of like the law of attraction. When we put it out there, and we put it out to more people, when we're more intentional about what we want to accomplish, and we're more intentional about how we are going to convey our bodies and ourselves to other people, the likelihood that it comes back to us is much greater. So I want to talk about state. State is the most important thing. Like physically, where are you at in your life, in your world? What is going on? I don't care how stressed you are. I don't care how mad you are. I don't care how dejected you are. I don't care of anything negative going on in your world. If you can get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, especially for the interview, you will be successful. I'm a big proponent of power poses. I'm a big proponent of screaming at the top of your lungs and dancing out. In fact, I'd like to do that with you right now. So for the next 30 seconds, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to stand up. I'd like you to shimmy it out. I'd like you to shake it out. I'd like you to scream at the top of your lungs. Just scream at the top of your lungs at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out. Let it loose. Let it go, because you've got nothing to lose. I don't care if it's a popularity contest. I don't care if you're in a library. I don't care if you're in a house. What do you have to lose? This is not a coolness effort here. It's about making an impact and preparing yourself physically for being successful. What is the price of success? Getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. Maybe looking a little weird to some of your colleagues, coworkers, or peers, but what is that cost to you in the long run? Nothing. They're going to say, hey, what were you doing? Why were you dancing? Why were you screaming at the top of your lungs? You say, hey, I'm getting myself in a state conducive for being successful. Maybe they've never heard about it before. Maybe they've never learned. You can educate them on this. So don't worry about how other people are perceiving you when you are going to get yourself into a state that's going to level up your game, especially when it comes to the interview. Now, you may not want to do this in the office of a business that you are about to interview in, but you could certainly do it in the bathroom, in a bathroom stall. Get yourself into a 2-minute power pose. Stand up like Superman or Superwoman, or put your arms out like as if you're a star. There's a lot of things that you can do to get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, but you should be doing something, because if you're not, you are letting the way that other people perceive you essentially come up to chance. And you don't want to chance it, especially for the opportunity of a lifetime. And you have no idea which opportunity is the opportunity of a lifetime. It may not be this job. It could be the next one. If you make a positive impression in an interview and you may not land that job, that interviewer could have really loved how you interviewed, and that person may not be at that company for forever, or they might be, and they might come up with a new job. They might reach out to you personally to have you come and interview. It's all about the relationship. It's all about how they perceive you. It's all about that impression you leave. Your state is critical. Now, what is the story you tell yourself for why you are going to be successful? This is something we kind of did earlier when I asked you, how do you want other people to feel about you in the interview? This is a great exercise to prepare yourself for a professional interview. If you are intentional about how you want other people to feel about you, you are going to put yourself into a position to succeed, because then you're much more likely to manifest that outcome. Literally, law of attraction, putting it out there. I want other people to feel XYZ about me. Confident, smart, intelligent, well prepared. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's a weakness that you have, but you like to have them perceive it as a strength. Maybe it's a strength that you have that you'd really like to amplify even as a greater strength. Doesn't matter, but set an intention of something. Because if you don't set an intention of something, it could be wild in terms of what they actually perceive of you. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you're going to do to make the most out of this interview? Are you going to come prepared with questions? Are you going to come prepared with doing background research on the company? Are you going to make an intentional, focused effort on taking notes during the conversation, so then you're asking poignant, direct questions to the interviewer that are relevant about his or her life? Are you going to do the things that you need to do to be the most successful in an interview, or are you not? So the strategies you're going to learn from our guest speaker later on in this workshop, I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest speaker has to say. But before we jump into our guest speaker, I want to talk about one final thing, and that is getting yourself into a routine that can help you prepare for an interview. One of the things that I like to do, have an accountability partner. This could be it could be anybody. But what you want to do with your accountability is you want to share with your accountability partner 3 things that you learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to get closer to that internship or job. What this does, and you might think this sounds silly, you might think this sounds crazy, it could be another student in the program, it could be a friend of yours, does not matter. But what we've learned, what we've observed is that students who land jobs and internships through this program are substantially more likely to actually land that job and internship if they told other people about their experience. One of the questions we ask at the end of the question is, on average, how many other people did you tell about your experience in the program? What we ended up learning was that when a student told 20 or more people about their experience in Ambition in Motion, their likelihood of also landing their job and internship was substantially higher than students who didn't. There's a direct correlation to you telling more people about your experience and what you're learning in this program. to actually landing the outcomes you like than not. So I want to challenge you to identify an accountability partner. Share with them 3 things that you've learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to help you get closer to landing that job or internship. Now, the other big thing that I want to bring up with you is a referral program. So we are now starting to open up the applications and the signups for next fall. One, I'd love for you to be in part of the program again. You can get a new mentor, you're going to get new content, you're going to learn from new speakers. But more importantly, I want you to encourage other students to get involved as well. We have a referral program for you, so then you are discounted to get in the program next semester. Essentially, anytime that anybody applies, we ask them, how'd you hear about us? If they write in your name, you get credit. If you don't mind being an ambassador for this program and helping encourage other students to get involved and take advantage of this, I would greatly appreciate it, because it would help us make a bigger impact on more people, which is really what our goal is. So let's jump into our workshop. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. I'm so excited to transition into this next part of the workshop. Remember to answer the 3 questions that we asked during the workshop. That's how you get credit for being here within 24 hours of the workshop going live. If you've got any questions during the workshop, please feel free to post them in the comment section. We are going to work on answering them. If you got any questions, any concerns, any issues with anything at all, please email support@envision-in-motion.com. We will answer those questions, concerns, and issues. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. So I'm so excited to transition into this next part of our workshop. We have an amazing guest here this evening. We have Austin Belcak. Austin is the founder of cultivatedculture.com, where he helps people land amazing jobs without traditional experience and without applying online. Austin has helped thousands of job seekers land offers from places like Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Salesforce, Tesla, Deloitte, Goldman Sachs, and more. His strategies have been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, Inc., and Fast Company. Austin, thanks so much for being here.
Garrett, I appreciate you having me, man. Thanks for the generous intro.
So I would love, before we really dive in, I mean, you are someone who you work at Microsoft right now. I would love to learn if you could just maybe give us a little bit of background as to why you're passionate about this area, this industry, or this space.
Yeah, for sure. Digital is something that I've always been passionate about. So for some context, 9 to 5, I work in partnerships at Microsoft on Microsoft advertising. So basically, if you're familiar with Google Ads, we do the same thing on our search engine, Bing, which, its reputation precedes itself, I think. But it's a lot of fun because for me, there's a couple of things that go into it. One, marketing, advertising, really, really fascinating space to me. It's something that through a lot of exploration and self-reflection after I graduated from college, it's something that I figured out that I wanted to do and sort of had to, teach myself about from a very high level into the specifics of digital marketing and SEO and content marketing and all this stuff that we hear a lot about these days when it comes to online marketing. So I was kind of self-taught. And then I made the jump into a startup in New York and then into Microsoft. And it's awesome for so many reasons. I mean, the service that we provide is great, but it's also awesome in terms of the flexibility, especially now. We were just talking about the state of the world. I have a very flexible setup. I can work from home. I can do my job from anywhere. And Microsoft just in general has been such an awesome place to be. I had a couple of options on the table when I was going through my job search at similar caliber places, and Microsoft's culture just really hooked me in, and that was been there for about 4.5 years now. And the growth that we've seen in 4.5 years, not just on the bottom line, but also, as a company, like talking about diversity and inclusion and all the initiatives that we've been driving, Saeed's been driving. It's been awesome, man. So yeah, this is definitely, I think as close to a dream job as you can get.
That's awesome. So we're talking about how you can make the most out of that first interview, how we can go in when we're going to that interview, when I'm meeting with an interviewer and I'm going in for a job. How can I go about setting myself apart? Do you have any initial thoughts or initial suggestions on what a student can do to really help set him or herself apart? I know that your area of expertise is landing the job without traditional methods. What are some of those methods? What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So not necessarily in the non-traditional sense, but the biggest thing comes down to preparation. And I think when you're a student, the people you're competing against, all the landscape is very flat. And so when I say flat, it means that everybody is sort of on the same level when it comes to experience and the things that they offer up. The differentiators are, what does your GPA look like? Where did you intern? Do you have some side projects going on? But it's not the same as, a role that's posted for somebody with 5 to 7 years of experience, a couple of years down the road. There's a much, much, much broader spectrum for those types of roles. And that's actually an advantage for you, the playing field being flat, because everybody is sort of operating from that space. And so if you can do a little bit more to go above and beyond, you're really, really going to set yourself apart. And where that really comes through is in the preparation. So we can talk about all these steps in more detail, but I have a very specific way that I like to prepare for interviews. And essentially, the biggest thing, what it comes down to, when you show up and you're sitting, across the screen or across the table or on the other end of the phone from somebody who's interviewing you, that person at the company, they have expectations in their head for this role. So they basically have the picture of an ideal candidate, and they realize they may not check every box, but they're looking to check as many as they can. And they're looking for a specific level of value. And so I always encourage people to look at qualifications and roles as more of an equation. So, if a role requires a specific degree and you don't have that degree, that doesn't mean you're going to be ruled out. That degree is simply a way for somebody to kind of quantify value in their head. So they may say, hey, I need 10 points for this role. And somebody with a marketing degree gets an extra 4 points right off the bat because that's really valuable. So you can either have a marketing degree or you can find another way to provide 4 points worth of value in that person's head. So that's the first thing to understand. And the biggest reason why people get rejected at any point in the process is because their value doesn't match up with the expected value that the hiring team wanted to see. And that could be because you kind of fell short, or maybe other candidates just offered up more value, checked more of the boxes. So if we want to get through to the end, if we want to improve our success rates and our conversion rates, we really need to dial into that value. And so for me, I work in sales. The first thing they teach us, day one of sales training back in the day, is if you want to be great at selling, you have to make your pitch about the other person. And I think what happens a lot of times throughout the job search, on resumes, on cover letters, applications, in interviews, we spend a lot of time talking about ourselves. We spend a lot of time talking about things that we've done in the past. And when you're a student, one of the biggest things I hear from the students that I teach is that they say, well, I only have this internship experience, or I only have these courses. Like, how can I offer value, or how can I, really speak about this in a way that makes me seem like I know what I'm doing? Because, there are other candidates out there who have actually worked in this role for a year or 2 years or whatever it is. And one of the easiest ways to kind of work around that problem is to flip the script a little bit and make the interview and your answers about the company, the person sitting across from you. And so when we're preparing, the biggest thing that you can do is really, really work to understand what the company cares about. So, where are they at right now? Are they in a good place? Or are they in a bad place? What are they looking to do over the next 6 to 12 months? What goals do they have? What initiatives are they driving to hit those goals? What challenges are they potentially facing? What new products are they launching? What is their culture? What is their vision? When you get an understanding of all of that, and then you start tailoring your answers specifically to what you've learned, those goals, those challenges, those initiatives, that's going to allow you to shift the conversation away from the stuff that you don't want to talk about or are worried about talking to. And it's going to help you shift things toward what the person on the other side actually cares about. So in a nutshell, that's the biggest piece of advice. And we can talk through the specific steps that you can take to research and kind of get prepped. I think we're planning to do that. So yeah, that would be my initial lead in.
I love that. That's great insight. The concept of putting yourself in the other person's shoes. That's extremely invaluable, because at the end of the day, I think we learned this thing called the elevator pitch, where it's all about me, me, me. And in reality, people don't care about you. They don't give two shits about who you are. They care about themselves. And so if you can cater your responses and your insight and your experiences to what they are looking for so they can check off their boxes, that is awesome. And I think, what was it, the Journal of Vocational Behaviors that said that people who have
I think it was for men, if you've got 40% of the qualifications on the job, you're just likely to get the job as someone who's got 90%. And for women, if you've got 30% of the qualifications, you're just likely as to land the job as someone who's got 90%. But I think the big key that you've really outlined is if you can help them check the box in their mind that although you don't have that degree, you still have the experiences. And that experiences could come from class projects. It could come from volunteer experiences. It could come from internships.
Yep, 100%. And I'm really glad you mentioned that, because what I see in the job search is that we use a lot of processes and language and things that we don't use anywhere else. So if I'm going to sell you a car, I'm not going to hand you a one sheet with like weird language on it about the car. Like, I'm going to show you the car and what it can do. And so in the job search, it's really strange to me, coming into this space, not coming from a recruiting background, but more so coming from the job seeking perspective and really tearing apart this process. It's super weird to me that we're expected to sell our value and our credentials on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper using this like resume language that we don't use anywhere else. And so the toughest thing is when we talk about ourselves and when we try to sound super professional and use these buzzwords, a lot gets lost in translation, right? Because we're essentially hoping and crossing our fingers that the person sitting across from us is going to connect the dots between what you just said, which is probably not the way you would share it if you were talking to a friend or, somebody that you have a deeper connection with. And we're essentially hoping that they see what you said and say, oh yeah, that aligns perfectly. When instead what we should be doing is just assuming that the person across from us, and I don't mean this in a degrading or demeaning way whatsoever, but if you treat the person across from you as if they were like a 5-year-old child with no context and no knowledge, and you had to walk them through every step of your experience and why it matters to them, that's the best way to approach this. Because if you say, hey, look, instead of showing up to Microsoft and saying, hey, I really want to work here. I've had this internship experience. It's not quite aligned, but I did this other thing that sort of makes it align. If instead you show up and say, hey, I've done some research and I saw, I was listening to a keynote that Satya was giving, Microsoft CEO, a couple of weeks ago, and he specifically mentioned this initiative, which I think relates to this team. And I did some deeper research, and I saw out there that people are saying that this one thing may be a specific challenge. And I've actually worked on a similar challenge in the past. My internship, I was on this team. I was supporting a team where we worked to solve that same challenge. So I definitely have experience in that realm. But I'd love to learn a little bit more. How is that challenge impacting you guys? What plans do you have to execute on it? And so now all of a sudden, what I've done, I've still talked about my experience, but I've spun it up to roll into something that they care about. And now I've posed a question to them, which shifts the conversation away from this rigid, they ask you a question and you answer, and it's like very robotic and professional. Now I've kind of turned it into a conversation, prompting him or her to tell me a little bit more about that challenge and what they're doing. And now all of a sudden we've started a dialogue, and that's the best type of interview. That's really where you're able to forge that relationship and learn a ton about the role.
Because it also shows that you did your research. It shows that you did your background research without actually saying, hey, I did my background research and this is what I was able to find. You can say, hey, I observed that XYZ thing had happened and here's how my experiences play into that.
Yep.
It really showcases that well. So it makes me think of a question I want to ask the audience right now. And that is, what is an experience that you have, but maybe on paper you don't necessarily have it? So maybe you don't have a marketing degree, but you've had a lot of experience in marketing. What I would love to learn is, what is an experience that you may not have on a traditional, like, this is my degree, but you have this experience, and how did you get this experience? Write in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. I think that would really help you get in the mode of conveying how your experiences, whether that be for volunteers or internships or part-time jobs or class projects, anything that you've done, really how they can help you convey why you got that experience. So post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. So Austin, I want to dive back into the steps that you identified of how you can make the most out of that first interview, or really how you can prep for that, what you can do in the interview. You mentioned you had some steps. I'd love to talk about those steps. Does that sound all right with you?
Yeah, let's do it. So step one is, if we look at the interview process as a whole, and most of the interviews you go on, I don't know how many folks have been on multiple interviews who are watching or listening to this, but something that I found when I was interviewing during my job search was every interview had a pretty similar format, and I saw a lot of the same questions coming up. So, I'd show up to the office, or I'd get on the phone. There'd be like a couple minutes of small talk. And then we jump right into the questions, usually led off by something like, Garrett, tell me a little bit about yourself. And then you kind of do that whole thing, your spiel. And then maybe they ask you, well, and tell me a little bit more about why you're interested in this role. What brought you here? What has you interested in this account manager role, or whatever it is? And then we go into some of the behavioral questions. A lot of what we do here focuses on putting the client first, but sometimes you're going to run into issues. So can you tell me about a time where you ran into an obstacle with a client, but you overcame it? Or tell me about a time that you failed. All these types of questions that are aimed to kind of tease out that story and that information and the results that you got. And then at the end, there's a little bit of time for Q&A where you get to ask the interview questions, right? And so pretty much every interview follows that flow. And so what we can do is, what I see a lot of people doing that is a bit of a mistake, is essentially preparing for every single interview from scratch. So they don't do too much prep ahead of time, and then they wait for the company to call them up and say, hey, Garrett, we'd love to bring you in for an interview. How does next Monday sound? And you're like, today's Thursday. I got 4 days. Okay, let me get after it. And then they just go try to crank out some answers and a strategy in 4 days. But the problem with that is you're starting from scratch every time, and you're basically rebuilding every time. And it's very, very tough to be successful when you have to basically go back to zero with every new interview that you land. So instead, what I recommend doing is focusing in on essentially the stuff that happens in 80% of interviews, and really, really working to dial into those answers to those questions. And then what we can do is, if we work to memorize answers and examples for those questions, then when the company calls us up and says, hey, we'd love to bring you in for an interview, you already have a core set of answers ready to go, rehearsed, refined, practiced, and you're going to be able to deliver them really well. And then you can spend the rest of the time, you can spend that 4 days or whatever it is, really diving into tailoring it to the company. So for me, the way that looks is, I will open up a Google Doc or a Word doc, and I'll write down 8 to 10 of the most common questions. And I have them, if you go to my site, if you go to cultivatedculture.com/interview-preparation, I have a whole list of them there. And essentially they are, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? Tell me about a time you exhibited leadership. Tell me about a time you overcame an obstacle. Tell me about a time you saw success. Tell me about a time you failed. What's your greatest weakness? There's a couple more in there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down all those questions, and I'm going to sit down. And first, I'm just going to do a brain dump. Day one, I'm just going to, or even take a couple days, just put everything on paper, stream of consciousness. Don't worry about, refining or editing. Just dump it all in there and put it away when you're done. Then take a day off and come back and go through your answers, and then revise them, refine them, and rehearse them out loud. Like, talk through them, say them, and continue, rinse and repeat that for 5 days in a row. And by the end of the 5 days, your answers should be in a much, much better position. And now what I want you to do at that point is, you're going to come back and basically rehearse them. There's this psychological concept called spaced repetition, and it's used heavily in anywhere where you need to memorize things. And essentially, if you just Google spaced repetition, you can learn more about it. But essentially, they come up with a plan for you where you do a lot of the memorization up front, and then you only need to revisit things occasionally, and you'll still have full retention. So at that point, what you're going to do is, once you get to full memorization, you can implement the spaced repetition techniques to kind of keep it fresh in your brain. But also take it one step further. So record yourself on video delivering those answers, and look at your body language. Look at the way you emphasize things. Listen back to it. Watch it. And then do the same thing. Iterate, refine, improve. And you can do that starting now, because the whole goal here isn't necessarily to get ready for the interview at Google or Goldman Sachs or this specific company. It's more for you to flesh out your examples and to flesh out your story. When somebody asks you, tell me about yourself, what does that story look like? When somebody says, tell me about a time you overcame an obstacle, what example are you going to give? And so at that point, you're going to be really, really, really prepared for pretty much any interview. You could walk in without doing much other prep, and you can feel way more confident than probably where you're at now. So that's the first step. And then the second step, and I'll pause to see if you have any questions, but the second step is then, how do we personalize that sort of core set of answers? How do we personalize that and tailor it to the companies when those interviews start to pop up? So I'm happy to walk through that, but any questions on the first piece there?
No, I think that's amazing advice. I think that is excellent. I mean, just to kind of reiterate, essentially, you're going to get asked a core set of questions in any interview that you participate in. No matter what, you're going to get asked these core sets of questions. If you have your answers memorized and ready to go for each one of them, that's critical, because it's just going to get in the flow. It's going to be a force of habit, a force of nature. It doesn't necessarily matter who's asking you these questions. You're going to already know the answers. And so as opposed to having to prep for every individual interview individually, you can actually have the interviews ready and set before you even get started. And so that's awesome. So I think, honestly, I'm going to take a quick moment to ask the audience a question. What is something that you can do right now to start preparing for the interview? Write in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. I mean, I think that what you just had to say, Austin, was pretty invaluable. That's pretty awesome. One other question I do have, I'd love to learn your thoughts on this. I was reading Dr. Robert Cialdini. He has this book called Persuasion.
Yeah, it's an awesome read.
It's a great book. One of the pieces of advice he has in there for job seekers is setting the stage for the interview itself. One of the pieces of advice he gives is, before you start the interview, he says, before you start the interview, go into the interviewer and ask this question. Say, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to interview me today. I know that you probably have a lot of questions for me, but before we get started, I was hoping that I could ask you a question. And they'll typically say, yeah, sure, whatever, shoot, go for it. And then you ask the question, why do you decide to offer me the opportunity to interview with you today? And the reason why Dr. Robert Cialdini suggests this is because it gives you a roadmap, similar to kind of what you said of, people love to talk about themselves. It gives you a roadmap of what they want to hear. So they might say, hey, we really like that internship experience you put on your resume, or we really like that volunteer experience you had, or we really liked that, school projects that you worked on, whatever it may be. It gives you a roadmap for what they want to hear for the rest of the interview. But the other thing it does is it primes their mind to think about why they like you as opposed to why they don't like you. So what are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely love it. That key few minutes before the official interview starts, that's so critical. And that's a fantastic tactic to leverage. The other thing that I like to do too is try to get a little bit of research on them ahead of time, and use those couple of minutes to steer the conversation towards something that I know that they like. So for example, when I was interviewing at Google, I just dove into all the social media profiles for the people that I was interviewing with, and I Googled their names. And I saw that one of the people there really liked to ski. And so when we showed up, we started, I asked him, how was your weekend? He asked me how mine was. When he asked me, I sort of dove into the story rather of a ski trip that we were supposed to go on, but it was up in the air and I hadn't been all season, blah blah blah. And anyways, I kind of shifted the topic on purpose towards something that I knew that he liked. And he came back and started asking me, oh, well, what mountain were you going to go to? And then we started going back and forth. And next thing we knew, we already had 3-4 minutes of a conversation that was outside of just this super professional environment. And then if you layer that onto if you layer the strategy you just mentioned on top of that, so you do a little bit of that small talk, hopefully you can steer towards something they like. Then you sit down and set the stage. Right off the bat, one, you've sort of created a little bit of a rapport, and you've kind of removed this super professional and rigid environment and created more of a personal space. And then second, you end up getting that roadmap, just like you mentioned. You get them thinking about why they like you, and now they have this other reason they like you, because you just talked about something that they're interested in. And then that's going to totally shift the dynamic of the interview, the way they ask questions, the way they receive the information. So yes, that first few minutes to start off the interview is absolutely critical, and a lot of it hinges on, and that's sort of the last piece in my research process is going and finding out information on these people. You have to do your due diligence up front, but it's so worth it.
Absolutely. Cool. That's awesome. So let's dive into step 2.
Sure, for sure. So step 2 is really around personalization, kind of like I mentioned. So there's 2 sides to personalization, and the first is tailoring your answers. So I mentioned before, we want to be able to show up and speak directly to things that are going on at the company. So a lot of people know that they need to research companies before they go in. But in my opinion, they don't do enough research, or they don't research well. So everybody knows they need to go, read the company website and go look at their mission statement, and, maybe scroll through some of their social media feeds, and all that is great for sure. But on top of that, there's a couple things that I really like to do. So 4 specific things, 2 for public companies and 2 for private that also work for public. So on the company side of things, first, you want to just go listen to their earnings call. So you can find this super easily. If you go to Google, you can just type in the company name and investor relations, and it'll pop right up. And essentially, public companies are required to report out on their earnings and their progress every quarter. They basically have to share it with everybody who owns stock. And those calls are awesome because they're 30 to 60 minutes and they hit on everything we talked about before. So you'll learn immediately, where's this company at? Are they doing well? Are they not doing well? What goals do they have for the next 6 to 12 months to capitalize on momentum or sort of turn the ship around? What specific initiatives are they driving to hit those goals? What challenges are they potentially going to face? What is their vision? And you're going to hear all that, straight from the mouths of the people who are running the business. They're free to watch. Anyone can watch them. And they typically come with a webcast, a transcript that you can download, and even sometimes a slide deck. So that's a great place to start to essentially get a jumping off point for a lot of the stuff that we care about. Next, number 2 for public companies as well, there's a site called seekingalpha.com. And Seeking Alpha is essentially like a Google Finance with the additional layer of opinion pieces written by financial analysts. So you can show up there, you can punch in the company stock ticker, and on the right-hand side of the page, you'll see all the news, the objective stuff that's happening. They recently announced, this specific dividend, or they're going to launch this initiative, or they're, acquiring this company, all very objective, like, hey, this stuff is happening. But then, and that's great to know, but then on the left-hand side, there's an analysis section where these financial analysts will, they basically spend their whole professional lives are geared around researching these companies and understanding, should you buy the stock or should you not? And so you're going to get a bunch of opinions on why, Microsoft stock is going to go through the roof for X reason, while the next person says Microsoft stock is going to tank for Y reason. And so that's going to really give you a sense of, one, the types of opinions that are out there, good and bad, but also the specific ways these people are talking about things and how they're addressing them. That's going to help you form your own opinion, but also, again, be able to show up and say, hey, I know you're launching X, but there's this concern around this challenge over here, or you're launching X, and I think people are really excited about this specific thing. Is that in the works? So again, asking questions at a deeper level. Number 3, which works for both private and public companies, is just listening to interviews with executives. So going and looking up the people on the leadership team and going to YouTube or going to Google and just typing in, the person's name in interview or the person's name in podcast and seeing what comes up. When you get somebody talking about their company for 20, 40, 60 minutes, you're going to learn so much. You're going to hear what the stuff that they emphasize. What do they keep coming back to? What do they really hammer home? And then how do they speak about it? Because all these corporations and companies have essentially their own language. And if you can mirror some of that language to the people that you're interviewing with, you're going to come across as much more credible and as having done your research ahead of time. And then finally, you may pick up on a little nugget that they just happen to drop in the interview that you're not going to find in a Forbes article, in a news article. And sometimes those are the best pieces of information. So I like to listen to a few interviews with a few different people if I can, just to get a more well-rounded sense of what's going on. And then finally, the last thing I really like to do is actually go out and talk to the company's customers if it's feasible. And so, for example, I was just coaching somebody who wanted a job at Microsoft in a marketing role. So we looked through some of Microsoft's products, and we recently launched this product called Teams, which is supposed to compete with Slack. And so what we did, Slack has all the market share, but they're having trouble getting enterprise clients to pay for their solution. Everybody has bought Microsoft Office, and Teams comes with Office, but nobody uses Teams yet because they've all been using Slack. So we had to come up with a couple of ideas for how Teams could potentially gain more market share. And so we went out and we researched the customers. We went and spoke to them. We sent them surveys. We even talked to customers from their competitors at Slack, and we asked them, what do you like about it? What do you hate about it? What would you improve? And then she can show up in the interview and say, hey, in researching for this interview, I went and talked to 30 of your customers, and here's what I learned. And that blows people away because nobody else is going to that level of detail with their research. And so even just saying that is going to blow them away. But the information that you'll be able to convey through that is also huge. And so you want to take everything you learn from that research, and then you want to tailor it and bake it into your answer. So again, like we said, if one of your examples for how you overcame success, you've already had that fleshed out, how can you then use that as supporting evidence for something that you learned about a new initiative that they're driving? And so taking the answer that you already came up with and memorized and rehearsed, and just adding on that little piece where we can then flip the script and say, and I know that you all are running into a similar challenge or driving a similar initiative to what I worked on in the past. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. Can you walk me through, where it's at? what challenges you're facing, et cetera. And so that's the first bucket, is tailoring your answers. The second is seeing what other questions you might be asked. So people listening may be familiar with Glassdoor.com. It's basically a review site for jobs. And while I wouldn't recommend necessarily trusting the company reviews on there, they do have an interview section. So if you search for a company, there's a little tab that says interviews, and people will actually come and write a review about the interview experience that they had. And companies don't tend to manufacture this as much the same way they manufacture the actual reviews. But there's a section at the bottom of each of the reviews where people talk about the questions that they were asked. And so if you go through there, you can really pick up on some specific questions. When I was interviewing at Microsoft and Google, there were some specific questions around case studies and scenario-based questions. If you had to charge people for Google or for Gmail rather, like how would you go about implementing that? And I would have never been prepared for that question if I didn't see it on Glassdoor. So you can pick up a couple of those extra questions, and because your core answers are already set and memorized, you can spend whatever time you have left really dialing into answers for some of those other questions that you might be asked.
Wow, that is an extremely valuable nugget of information, Austin. That was really cool. Then I feel like I can see this applying to so many different people, a lot of things that we have not heard before. I think that was extremely insightful. So I want to ask the next question, because every student that's in this program, they've got a mentor. Mm-hmm. How can you leverage your network to help you land interviews?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is really finding the right people to connect with. And so it's awesome that everybody here has a mentor. What I would try to do is leverage that mentor to get in touch with more of the right people if you can. The biggest thing is when we get a referral, referrals are basically the most effective way to get hired in today's market. Applying online, you have about a 2% chance of getting through the door. Referrals, your chances are much, much higher. And the data just shows crazy numbers. So on the conservative side, 40% of hires come from referrals. And with that same survey that shared the 40% was actually larger than the next two channels combined. I think they came in at 38%. But that's a conservative estimate. Some of the other estimates out there from the Wall Street Journal and some other places say that 85% of roles are filled through referral. And so referrals are really your ticket in the door if you want to have some more control over this process. But not all referrals are created equal. We all may have a friend who works at a company we like, but if you want to roll in data science and they work in accounting, that referral doesn't always translate because the person on the data science team may not know the people on the accounting team. And so we want to find the right people. On top of that, a lot of folks try to network or reach out to recruiters or people in HR. And I don't necessarily recommend that either, because one, those people are really, really busy. They're the face of the role. And by really busy, I don't mean, everybody's really busy. They're inundated with people making the exact same ask that you are. Can we connect? Can you help me out? And so it's really hard to stand out through the noise. But even if you are successful, their influence ends once they refer you in. So they push you through the door, and now all of a sudden you're meeting with a whole hiring team of people that you've never met before. And this recruiter doesn't have much say over what's going on. So instead, what you really want to do is go find somebody who may be the hiring manager, who may be managing you if you were in the role, somebody who may be your peer, your colleague sitting next to you if you got hired. Those types of people can refer you in just the same, but then on top of that, they can advocate, they can coach you through the interview process, and they can advocate for you. They can be in the room where the hiring decision is being made and say, look, we have a ton of great candidates. I know we're down to the final couple, but I have to just say, I've spoken to Garrett a couple of times, and here's what his background looks like. He's done some awesome work specifically around X and Y, and I think that's going to be really valuable for what we're trying to do. I just have to take a stand and put my weight behind Garrett as the person we should hire. And when you have somebody in the room where the hiring decision is being made saying that about you, that is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so finding those types of people and connecting with them is absolutely the best way to not only get in the door, but convert more of those interviews into offers down the road. And so if you have a mentor who can connect you with some of those people, that's fantastic. A lot of times, we won't have a connection to them. And so we sort of have to go build that relationship from scratch. And that's sort of what my whole job search system is based around. But the bottom line is that relationship building, networking, getting that referral it's delayed gratification in the sense that you can't go home and say, hey, I submitted 20 apps online, so I did my thing for the day, I'm good to go. You really, and it's really vulnerable. You're emailing a stranger and basically, trying to work to get their help. but it's so much more effective when you look at the numbers and the outcomes. It's absolutely worth taking the lead.
I love that. That's really, really good insight, Austin. So let's talk about interview etiquette. Let's talk about post. I know that a lot of candidates, especially in college, they will get an offer way ahead of when they actually will start. They'll get an offer maybe in August or September for a May or June start date.
Mm-hmm.
What is proper etiquette for handling those offers in a circumstance? So let's say maybe you're in between two different roles. You're waiting to hear back from somebody else. You got a job, but you're like, I don't know if that's the one that I want to choose. How do you handle that? And then specific on top of that, how do you also handle issues with, let's say we had an internship over the summer between our junior and senior year. We got an offer at the end of the summer. It was a fine internship, but I don't know if it's what I want to be doing. What is the proper etiquette to handle all of those situations?
For sure. So there's a number of different ways to handle it. If you have an offer on the table and there's a deadline associated with it and nothing else is going to come through, you're sort of stuck between, that's an ultimatum, right? You have to say yes or say no. And there's actually an option C, which I would personally recommend. But what you always want to do is work to, if you have an offer and you have other opportunities on the table, you always want to leverage that offer to try and speed up the process somewhere else. Because the ideal situation is having everything in front of you at the same time. Now, it's a bit of a unique situation for students in the sense that if you could land an offer in September, but you don't graduate until May. And so I will give my honest opinion here, and it may be a little bit cynical for people coming into the workforce, but at the end of the day, something that I see a lot at companies today is this idea of, oh, we're a family. We treat our employees like family. We treat, everybody here, we're all in this together. But then the coronavirus hits and, all of a sudden everybody who is family, well, now a big chunk of them have just been laid off or fired because the company, has to cut expenses. And, what you normally wouldn't lay off or fire family just because times got tough. But I guess, that's how some companies treat family. Now, there are rare exceptions to this rule. I will say, and this is less of a shameless plug than more of the truth. Microsoft really works really hard to live those values. And that's something that I've seen. That's why I've been here for so long. I know there's a few other companies that do that as well. The vast majority of companies are looking at the bottom line and viewing their employees mostly as assets. And the family thing tends to be a way to keep everybody happy and rah-rah and pushing towards the goal. So when it comes down to negotiation, some companies will give you a deadline. Some companies will give you a hard and fast offer. And if you're not happy with that offer, you don't necessarily need to put yourself in a position where you say no and kind of leave yourself out to dry. What I personally like to do is, one, like I said, if there are other opportunities on the table, I like to try and take that offer and use it to speed up the other processes. But if I don't have anything else and, it's kind of make or break, I'm probably going to accept that offer. But if I don't like the offer or I think I can do better, I'm going to keep job searching and I'm going to keep looking at opportunities that are out there. And I've shared this recommendation or opinion with a lot of people in college, and they've told me, a million times their career counselors will say, "Don't burn bridges," and we hear that across the board, and that's very true. You should not burn a bridge, but if you are able to secure an offer that is more aligned with what you want to do, pays you better, checks more of the boxes that you're looking for, you should absolutely take that offer, even if you have to rescind another one that you already accepted, simply because so many reasons. The higher you start out your base salary earlier on in your career, there's an exponential logarithmic return on the amount of earning potential that you have down the road. Somebody who starts out at 60K versus somebody who starts out at 100, that person at 100 is at a massive advantage because every time they go to a new role, the data shows that if you switch companies, you have the opportunity to basically make up to around 21% in terms of salary increase. 21% for $100,000 versus 60 is a substantial difference. And that's just the starting point. That's to the next role. And there's going to be, I think the average these days is something like people go through anywhere around 10 roles through the course of their career, give or take. So, you're starting your second role so much higher. On top of that, if a company is going to allow you to do work that you're interested in, that you're really passionate about, that gets you excited, you shouldn't feel like you have to say yes to another company simply because they offered you a job first if you're not as excited. You're spending 40 hours a week at this place, sometimes more if you're really grinding away, or that's the culture there, and that's fine if you're okay with it. But you spend a lot of time at this place. And so you want to make sure that you're doing stuff that you love, that sets you up for what you want to do next. And then finally, just all inclusive, looking at benefits, looking at PTO, looking at who your manager is going to be, all that stuff factors into play here. And at the end of the day, if you can get a better offer, a company, how many times have people applied for jobs and told us, hey, Garrett, sorry, but we went with somebody who was a better fit. And you're like, okay, how many times have companies told us the same thing after they've already said, yes, we want you to come for the final round interview, or like, we really, really like you. Or even cases where people are like, we think things are in a really good place. We just have to draft up some documents. We'll get back to you. And then you never hear from them again. On your side as the job seeker, you have control here, and this is like your life and your career. So you can do this politely, but you can essentially tell companies, hey, I found another better offer or another better situation that's a better fit for me, and I think I have to accept that. So that is my opinion. That's probably not going to be agreed upon if you ask 10 other people in especially in the career counseling space, or people who are usually coaching college students. But that would be my response.
I love that, man. I think it's great. I think it's unpopular. I think it's a very unpopular opinion and belief, but I think you're right. I mean, companies are going to do what's best for them, and you should be able to have the leeway to do what's best for you as well. So it makes me think of a question I want to ask the audience right now, and that is, what are the key components, what are the key factors that you have identified for yourself that you want to make sure, what are the boxes that you would like to check for your first full-time job offer? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn what boxes you'd like to check. I think it helps kind of, one, give some insight to other students about what boxes other students are checking off, but two, really help you maybe clarify what are the other boxes that you haven't considered yet. So post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. So Austin, there's so many, you've given some really amazing advice and some really great insight. I guess, maybe the last question I have is, how do you follow up after an interview? You had the interview, you think it went well, or maybe it didn't go so well. I don't really know. How do you follow up? What is the best etiquette for following up after the interview?
For sure. And before we jump into that, I'll just give a quick example of what we talked about before that popped in my head. I was coaching a student last year. She was in basically a master's of data, and she was looking for a job offer. I started working with her in February, and she got an offer from an insurance company in Nevada, like middle of nowhere, Nevada, around March. And we kind of worked to push the offer back a little bit into April. But the offer wasn't so great. It was very, very stale. It was a very old school work environment. It just wasn't for her. So she kept it, but she continued job searching. We continued working together. And she actually ended up getting an offer from Dell shortly after that paid about twice as much, and was much, much more aligned with what she wanted to do. So she went ahead and rescinded the offer from the first place that she had already accepted. And then she went on to actually accept the Dell offer and go work there. And so she upgraded in almost every capacity, but it was because she felt comfortable enough to basically say, hey, I got to take care of myself first. I have to pay myself first. And I'm not going to let like a little bit of uncomfortableness or awkwardness force me to go to the desert and make half as much as I could potentially make. So just a quick little anecdote there. But in terms of following up, so there's a couple of things we can do here. When you go into the interview, you go do your best, you kind of deliver it. And then the first thing you want to do after the interview is send a thank you note. You should always send a thank you note. There's a lot of people out there who say like sending a handwritten thank you note is great. You can do that if you want. Just please, no matter what you do, send an email, because an email will actually get to the person and it gets there quickly. And so you can literally just start with a quick like, hey, Name, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. But then if you can tie in some stuff that you talked about, so maybe specifically, I really enjoyed talking about that challenge that you mentioned and how you all are dealing with it. Again, I have a little bit of experience working on that from this thing that I did in my internship or this project that I worked on. Basically just parroting back something that you spoke about to show them, hey, I really listened to what you had to say. I really enjoyed this. I actually remembered what we talked about, because a lot of people show up and they just say like, hey, thanks for the interview. Here you go. And surprisingly, the majority of people actually don't send thank you notes at all, which is kind of shocking to me. But if you can just show up and thank them for their time, kind of recap a little tidbit that you talked about, and then just say, if there's anything else that I can do or provide that would be helpful, just let me know. I'm really, really excited for this opportunity. Thank you again, and sign off. So send that email off to them. You can write the handwritten thank you note if you want. I personally don't. But then you want to reflect on the interview and think about, okay, what went well and what didn't. And there's a strategy that I like to use called the value validation project. If there's a role that I would kill to have, like this is my dream job, or I'm so stoked about this, and I want to make sure that I did everything I could, I leave everything on the table, I put together what's called a value validation project. And that's essentially a deliverable. It could be a deck, it could be a video, it could be a little tool that you built or a website or whatever. But the goal is for you to speak to a problem or a challenge or something that they have, and find a way to sort of illustrate your value on your own terms in your own words. So going back to that person I spoke about at Microsoft with Microsoft Teams and Slack, we basically took that feedback from all the people that she surveyed, and we put it into a deck, and we basically titled the deck, 3 opportunities for teams to increase market share. And we went through all of the things that we learned. We showcased the data. We talked through exactly what we asked these people. And then we came up with a couple of recommendations. And so she actually brought that to the interview ahead of time. But if you don't feel super prepared before the interview to do that, you can wait till after and see what information you get out of these people. Then you can go put together a value validation project, and you can send it to them. And what that does is, if they already liked you, that's just going to put you over the top. It's going to put you over the moon. You're going to be like far and away #1 candidate. But if the interview didn't go so well, that sort of gives you another chance to show up and say, hey, look, I don't think that I really conveyed my value in the way that I wanted to in that interview. So take a look at this project that I put together. And I think that's a much better that's a much better reflection of what I bring to this role. And so it can save you a little bit from a poor interview experience. So that's the absolute best thing that you can do if you want to invest the time there. It is a little bit of a risk reward in terms of you have to do the work to put it together, and it's not always going to work out. And then on top of that, just stay on these people, follow up with them. Typically, if they give you a timeline and they say, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks, don't follow up with them before 2 wees, but put a reminder in your calendar to follow up with them on the 2-week mark. Stay on top of them because they're busy. They have a lot going on. For you as the candidate, this is like the biggest thing in your life going on right now, or like top 3 probably. For them, hiring is important, but once you get to the final rounds, like they're still doing their job on a daily basis, and they're probably doing it one person short, which is why they're bringing you or somebody else in. And so they have to manage all that on top of the hiring process. And even at a place like Microsoft, the hiring manager has to sign off and give feedback and connect with everybody. And so it's not just the recruiters. So give them the time that they ask for, but don't be afraid to politely follow up and just say, hey, I'm just checking in here. I'm really excited about this opportunity. Again, if there's anything else that I can provide or do, please let me know. Don't hesitate to ask. I'm happy to do it. You just fire that off, every couple of weeks, and just stay on them. That's the absolute best thing that you can do.
Austin, thank you. This is amazing wisdom. You've given some amazing insight. This is extremely helpful. I am grateful that you've given all of this information to our audience. Last question, Austin. How can our audience find you? How can our audience connect with you?
For sure. Well, I appreciate you having me on, Garrett. It's been a blast chatting. Interviews are one of my favorite things to talk about and kind of coach people on. But a bunch of ways you can find me. So my site, like I mentioned, it's cultivatedculture.com. If you just go there and scroll down the homepage, we have a bunch of free tools. I have a free resume builder that people can use. I have a free tool you can use to find people's emails. If you're in the interview and didn't get the email and still want to send them that thank you note, that's a great use for the tool. You can email me, austin@cultivatedculture.com. And then finally, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me there. If you do, I just ask that you send a personalized note with a connection request so I can pick you out of the crowd and make sure to connect. But yeah, those are all the spots. I'm always happy to help. And thank you again, man. I really appreciate you having me on.
This is awesome. Austin, thank you so much for being here. Students, thank you all for being here tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good night, everybody.